describe methods that businesses use to recruit employees. We'll identify some resume tips and tricks and look at relevant business and employment laws. We'll learn more detail about those employment laws as we move on to our employment law material in our next session. We'll also examine orientation, training, and evaluation. We'll discuss compensation as well as employee separation. And finally, we'll identify various methods for motivating employees in the field today. So why does this matter? We talk about human resource management because people are generally the most, if not the second most expensive part of a business. And one employee can really make or break a company in terms of any bad conduct or good conduct. If you have a rock star performer, they're going to help your business. Okay? Just like someone maybe doing the wrong thing could bring you some bad media attention or make you subject to legal liability. Ultimately, we want to make sure managers are promoting fairness in the workplace. So today we'll talk more about human resource management, the people side of business. Later we'll talk about employment law and learn more about the legal side of managing people. If you're interested in getting introduced to some of those laws now, you can look at the 5 manager mistakes that cause lawsuits in the video here. So let's talk about what human resource management is. It's the function of attracting, developing, and retaining employees who can perform the activities necessary to accomplish the goals of the organization. The 3 main objectives of human resource management is to provide qualified, well-trained employees for the organization. We also focus in human resource management on how to maximize those resources. We want to make employees more productive and more effective in the organization. Finally, satisfying individual employee needs is an important way to retain those employees, and that can be done through monetary compensation, other benefits, opportunities for growth and development on the job, and ultimately job satisfaction. So let's talk about some of the methods that businesses use to bring in employees. First, let's look at an example. Zappos is well known for consistently providing excellent customer service. We've talked throughout this course about how important customer service is to an organization. In the video above, you'll see CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of Zappos, Tony Hsieh, explaining how company values drive hiring decisions. Let's take a look.
What do you look for in a person that says, hey, this person would be a good employee or a good fit for the Zappos culture? Because I think that a lot of our members who work in contact centers and run departments on customer care are challenged by that. You know, how do you find the right skill set? And it's not always the hard skills, it's the soft skills as well. So I just was curious, having sat in on a training just a few minutes.
Yeah, we've actually, I think in general, found that it's, for the call center, for example, it's actually easier to hire people that don't have call center experience because you don't have to untrain them from bad habits.
De-brainwash them.
Right.
But basically what we do is our recruiting team has questions for each of our core values, and over time that list has kind of evolved. And so, for example, one of our core values is to be humble. So if we interview someone that's great in every way, has all the skills and so on, except they're really egotistical, we just won't hire them. Whereas I think and for any position, whether it's call center or as a lawyer or a software developer, whereas I think most companies, if that happened, they compromise and say, well, this person can add a lot of value to our top or bottom line, and there's this kind of annoying thing about him or her, but we'll hire this person. And I think you do that thousands of times, and that's why, after the 1,000th time you do that, then the culture is really bad.
So culture can be a big driver for making those hiring decisions. And some of the things we see Tony saying are common. While businesses want to see some education, they also want to see some work skills. Sometimes it's more about having those foundational skills like communication rather than specific experience in that industry. Sometimes they want to be able to train you right and avoid having to correct bad habits. We also see the core values being really important. Some firms might appreciate someone who's more confident, whereas here it can really conflict with that value they have of being humble. So let's talk about recruitment, which is the process of finding and hiring really the best qualified candidate for a job opening. And the hope is to do that in a timely and cost-effective manner. Organizations often have trouble finding the right person for a position. So what are some methods that you would recommend? Let's take a look about where to find candidates. So knowing where and how to search for the right candidates is really big. You can see there's lots of ways to post jobs. There's job centers, understanding more about the labor pool, so where specific jobs are posted. For example, in academia, a lot of jobs are posted on a couple main sites like the Chronicle of Higher Education or Higher Ed Jobs. And if you didn't know about those sites, it'd be difficult to advertise the position to the right market. In posting a job, you want to think about where to post that. So there are a lot of public banks for posting. You can also post on sites like Indeed, INDEED.com. It's also a great place for you to look for job opportunities. Monster.com is another. Now for you, you're very lucky in the fact that you're at a college. So Montgomery College, just like any college you may attend or may transfer to, these colleges offer their own sorts of job postings. What I love about that for employers is they're usually free. There's no cost to post on those sites, whereas something like Indeed, they're going to have to pay a premium to use it. And there they're able to recruit not just current students, but alumni as well. And so you're not having to compete as a student then with lots of other people in the general public, just the people at the college. So that can be a really good tool both for employers and then for you as a student. Take advantage of those job sites. For us, it's MCE Jobs. And every college has a career resource center. I encourage you to go visit ours. Job fairs can also be a good way to find opportunities, and these can be in the community, or again, you're in luck being at the college, they'll have job fairs that you can attend, bring resumes, and meet lots of firms. Okay, so we see a lot of different ways that you can do that. One way that's kind of new that I like is social media. A lot of people are using LinkedIn to find jobs. If you're not on LinkedIn, I encourage you to get on it. It's like a virtual resume. Okay, and it provides you a chance to actually find people in your network who might already be at a firm. It's also a great way to find job postings. They'll even send you, positions that are very similar to the experience you have or areas of interest for you. People also tweet and post on Facebook various opportunities. So using social media can be a great tool. Now, LinkedIn's going to be more expensive. Again, there'll be a price for it for an organization. But they're able to do kind of data mining and analyzing a whole group of people that have their resumes posted online for them. It's a great way for them to find good fits. So many firms are using it, and I encourage you to use it to help find opportunities. So going back to our overview here, let's look at how this process works. Okay, I'm just going to dive in a little deeper here. So you'll see in the recruitment process, generally you're going to start kind of specifying what exactly the job entails. Okay, so that's a big part of this, realizing that you have an opportunity and then describing it. You want to think about what's required to do that job so you get the right pool of candidates. For example, whether or not they need to have a degree and at what level. Is there a certain number of years of experience that's required? Sometimes you'll see jobs will list either a degree or, 3 to 5 years of experience so that they're not disqualifying candidates that may be great fits. Or they might ask for both. They might ask for certain skill sets like data analysis, research. Again, that's going to depend on the job itself. You want to think about what those specifications have to be and be generic enough that you'll be able to attract some great candidates. After you've described the job, you also have to decide where to list it. We looked at some places to do that. Then, running and picking out who you think will be the right candidates. Now we see that here. Doing an interview to make sure that, you're communicating with the person, not just in writing in the resume and cover letter, but also live in person. We'll talk more about the interview in a moment. Ultimately, checking references is important as well. You want to make sure that they're going to be a good candidate and that there's no sort of history that could cause any type of violence or an unsafe situation for your business. So this all starts this whole process with people submitting resumes, and sometimes there'll be thousands for a job opportunity. So having a strong resume is very important. It's something we do as an assignment in this course because of that. And you've seen this workshop already, but again, for resume tips and tricks, you can click here and see a nice overview of how to make a great resume so that you can get yourself the interview and ultimately move further along in this recruitment process. So let's talk more about interview tips. We've talked about being able to access the resume through the bit.ly/Wiser resume workshop or at the link on the screen. Now, hopefully that resume gets you into the interview, which is the most popular way to gauge whether the candidate's going to be a good fit for the role. So try to think if you've had any interview experiences of your own. I've been involved in a number of interviews on both sides, interviewing as a candidate for a position or as an employer interviewing for hire. And it's hard. People are nervous. There's a lot going on. Practice is the best way to improve your interviewing skills. You can practice with a friend. There are mock interview programs you can do where you ask a colleague or you ask someone who you're familiar with to pretend interview for you an opportunity. And again, that practice will help you to prepare. Some of my interview experiences, they've ranged. I've had interviews where I was with a group of candidates and there was one manager interviewing all 5 of us at once, and that can be very nerve-wracking because you have these people kind of comparing to you as you're going along. I've been in a situation where I'm the only candidate being interviewed, but then there are 5 people doing the interview, and suddenly it's like public speaking, you're in a large group. One of my favorite interviews is a phone interview or a video interview through something like Skype or FaceTime or Google Hangout. These really give you the opportunity to prepare. We'll talk more about questions that are common. You can prepare some responses, some examples, and if you practice and have your notes in front of you, you're actually able to really put on a great interview. And that's often the first stage before you get to the live interview setting. Interviewing for places like Deloitte Consulting, that was a month-long interview process that was very involved, all the way up, starting with a recruiter, then talking to someone who had a similar level as the role I was applying for, talking all the way up to a partner level. And they do a very interesting case-based analysis or a situational analysis. They're trying to ask you what you would do on the job and see how you'd respond, think through a problem. And so there are a lot of different ways that firms will interview you. It's good to get practice. Even if you don't want a job, go to the interview and try it out. One of my big tips for any interview is to bring the materials for that interview, anything they've asked for, whether it's just your resume, your cover letter, references, writing samples, bring those with you in a manila folder. And I encourage you to make a few copies of those folders and have them ready to hand to the people interviewing you. It shows a level of organization and it helps them. And so that's something that helps display your kind of work ethic on the job. That's been helpful to me in interviewing for some of my roles. Also, always be prepared with 3 to 5 questions. Don't just say, I don't have any questions, you'll look disinterested. So at the end of the interview, they'll often ask, what questions do you have? And you want to ask questions like, what type of growth opportunities are there at this organization in the next 5 years? Or, I see you have this wonderful volunteer program from your website, tell me more. Those indicate that I did my research, indicate I want to grow with the firm, and give me information I need. Remember, you're being interviewed, but you're also interviewing them to make sure you're the right fit. So let's talk about some of the common interview questions. I love this first one, which is, are you the best person for the job? Here it's having them tell you why they're a good fit. Another thing I like to ask people when I'm interviewing them is to tell me about themselves. I use what they start with to help figure out what the priorities are for that person. So if I ask you about yourself and you tell me first about your family, then a bit about your educational experience, then about your job, I know that your family is going to be very important to you because you brought that up first. And that's not a bad thing. It just helps me know more about you as a person. So that describe yourself question can be really helpful. The best and worst bosses, that question, describing your best boss and your worst boss, helps to understand some of the things you like in terms of leadership in the workplace. Your career goals, your work style, all these types of questions like working alone or on a team help indicate how you'll perform on the job. Now, many organizations utilize teamwork, so being able to be a leader but also work with others will be important. So you want to think about some of these common questions ahead of time and prepare your answers. You can go to this link or Google common interview questions and answers, especially for your specific job, to find out model answers for those questions, and even just to think through examples. If they're asking you if you like working alone or on a team, think of an example and have it ready That way you're not using the same example again and again, and you're not able to share as much of your background. Even if you don't have any work experience, you can use examples from the classroom. So yes, I like working in a team. In my introduction to business class, I had the opportunity to work with a diverse group of people, my classmates, in a group of 4 to 5 people. Together we worked on XYZ, we were successful, we got an A on that project, and really we became lifelong friends. That's a great way to share an example in the classroom that helps demonstrate your ability to work on a team. Now, if you are conducting an interview or you are being interviewed, you want to be careful not to ask discriminatory questions. So for example, you'll see on the screen, employers should not ask about any of the following, because to not hire a candidate because of any of these reasons is discriminatory, and we'll learn more about that soon. Things like race, color, sex, or gender, your religion, national origin, your birthplace, your age, any disabilities, or even just your marital or family status can lead to discrimination. And so it's important not to ask questions in that regard. Even just the way you ask questions, the one I like to use as an example, asking someone something like, do you have a car versus do you have a reliable form of transportation, can create a discriminatory situation. So you really want to be careful about the questions you're asking. Many interviews will actually prepare a list of approved questions, and they'll make sure to ask those same questions to each candidate to avoid discrimination or different treatment of different candidates. Even marital or family status comes into play here. You might be nice and just asking like, oh, do you have kids at home, and trying to make conversation. Unfortunately, that can lead to a situation where perhaps they can argue they're being discriminated against because they're a mom, because they're a father, because they have kids. So even just kind of regular conversation you think is helping build rapport could lead to some discrimination issues. If you're asked a discriminatory question, think about your options. First of all, you can always answer. I'm a mom, and so I would rather find out in the interview stage that they don't want a mom working for them, because I don't want to be a part of a company that feels that way. So I'm proud to have my daughter, and I would gladly say, I have my daughter at home and share that information. And if I don't get the job, better then than finding out, a year down the road after a bad job experience. So you always can answer the question, even if they shouldn't have asked it. You could also try to answer the intent of the question. For example, they're not supposed to ask about your place of origin. So if you're asked whether you're a United States citizen, which they should not be asking you, you can simply reply that you're authorized to work in the United States. It doesn't have to be that you're a U.S. citizen. Okay, just that you're eligible to work legally in the United States, which is really what they want to know. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Just like with age, there are some jobs where it's required that you're a certain age level. For example, being a bartender. Then they can ask, are you age 21 or older? The same example with the United States citizen. For some consulting jobs or some jobs with the U.S. federal government, they can ask if you're a United States citizen because that is required to get certain clearance levels. So again, if it's required to meet the functions of the job, they might ask you something that seems discriminatory, but they are allowed to in those rare circumstances. Also, if you're asked something not appropriate, you can always try to just change the topic and avoid the question. So for more information about what not to ask, you can go to this link. You can always Google, answers to illegal questions, and that way you can find out more, especially if you're the one conducting the interview. I encourage you to learn more about what's okay to ask and what's not okay. So let's talk about some tips for success in the interview. A big one is dressing for success. And I had a boss that said, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. It gives the appearance of you being in that role. Okay? Even if you think it's not the type of job where you need to be in a suit, it never hurts to be overdressed. It can hurt to be underdressed. So wearing a suit is the right way to go. And some employers really care about that because they want to see what you'll kind of look like and present yourself like with their clients. Another big thing is to practice. We've mentioned that before. Have a friend interview you. If you know someone who works in a similar field and has done that type of interview before, let them do a mock interview with you. The only way to get more comfortable is to keep practicing and go to interviews, even in jobs you're not that interested in. You should always take the interview because it allows you another opportunity to practice. You also want to make sure that you relax. A lot of the interviews that I've conducted, person walks in and we shake hands, and that's the first way to tell they're very nervous. Their hands will be pretty sweaty. So just take a moment like the polar bear and try to relax a bit. It's nerve-wracking, you're excited about the job opportunity, you're kind of being tested, and it feels scary. Think about ways that you like to relax. It might be looking at a picture of your dog before you walk in, or giving yourself some time to get situated before the interview by arriving early. Anything that helps you relax are big because it'll help you to think straight, during the interview process and perform better. The most important tool and resource during an interview is to build rapport. You have to remember the person conducting the interview is probably conducting many interviews, and it's very likely not the main thing they do on the job. They might be a business owner who has a million things to do, they've lost an employee, and they're trying to squeeze in this job search. So they're already frustrated and really overworked. You want to think about ways to make it easier, like using those vanilla folders. And you want to think of ways that you can be more memorable. They're getting those same responses. Why are you the right fit for the job? They're going to hear a lot of similar comments and everything sounds great. You can make a bigger impression by demonstrating your ability to work well with others, your communication skills, your networking skills. That's where you build rapport. So it might be something as simple as looking around their office and seeing, hey, they have a Red Sox, poster on their wall. Hey, I like the Red Sox too. And now you have this mutual connection. You'll hopefully be more memorable to them. It sounds crazy, but I interviewed for a project when I was at Deloitte, and it was just this building rapport that was so important to them that made me stand out. We actually had a connection, a lot of us on the project, that we all had been born in and lived in Massachusetts. And so that alone, it helped give them this kind of familiarity and helped to build that rapport in a way that made me stand out and be more memorable as a candidate. Now, here's some mistakes you want to avoid. First of all, arriving late. Okay, especially in this DC area. When someone arrives late and says, oh, there was traffic or the metro broke, that stuff happens all the time. You need to be on time for work. And so arriving late really means arriving at the time the interview starts. You should aim to be 10 to 15 minutes early. Because the metro and transportation and traffic in this area can be so unpredictable, I always encourage you to plan way in advance. Try to arrive half an hour to an hour early and find a nearby coffee shop. That'll give you time to be nearby, to collect your thoughts, and in case anything goes wrong, you're not arriving late to the interview, because that could make you lose the job over something so silly. Don't use your phone, especially in the waiting area. Let's say you're waiting to have the interview and there's just the administrative assistant there, and you're thinking, I can use my phone. That administrative assistant sees the person you're interviewing with every day and has a good relationship with them. So if they hear you saying anything kind of personal or inappropriate, or just using your phone in general can be disrespectful, that's not going to be okay. So make sure your phone's off. You don't need to have it on during the interview, and even in the waiting area, do not use it. Make sure you're paying attention. Okay, give the appearance that you're paying attention, nodding, saying okay, repeating information back. You need to be an active listener. Okay, if you're not paying attention, you're not going to be a good fit. Being unprepared, not practicing, not knowing the organization, you should be able to demonstrate that you've done your research about the role and about the organization. Most firms have websites. Look at it before you go into the interview. Make sure you dress appropriately. This isn't the sexy night out. There shouldn't be bra straps showing for the women. There shouldn't be underwear showing. That should be that you're covered, you're in a professional business setting, so you want to make sure you're wearing your suit and that you're dressed in a way that wouldn't be considered inappropriate. You also want to be careful not to badmouth. Probably you're leaving your old job because you didn't love it, but you don't need to be negative in the interview talking about the horrible experience you had there. Even just saying, gosh, it's a gross day outside, so it's raining. Try to be positive. People are attracted to that positivity. Managers have to deal with so many problems on a daily basis that having more negativity is not going to be something they'll be excited about. One of the biggest mistakes, and something I've actually chosen one candidate instead of another over, is the not saying thank you. Saying thank you to the interview is common business etiquette. So be careful at the end of the interview to make sure you ask that interviewer's contact information, their business card. That way you're able to connect and just say thank you very simply. It can be 2 to 3 sentences in an email. And I know you're very busy. Thank you for your time describing more about this exciting opportunity. I'm very interested in the role and I appreciate your consideration. Good luck with your search. That simple thank you can be so meaningful. When I was at Deloitte, we were hiring someone on our project, and only one candidate out of the 5 that we interviewed said thank you. And they not only said thank you to us, but they also thanked the client they had interviewed with. It made them stand out, and it showed they understood proper business etiquette and communication skills for the workplace. So I encourage you to practice doing an interview. Okay, practice being the interviewer, practice being the interviewee with a friend, with a family member, or with a colleague. Now, we will talk more in our employment law module about various business laws. As a quick introduction, just to let you know a highlight of these information about these various laws, I want to introduce you to the main few that will matter for a human resource manager. A human resource manager is selecting and hiring employees, and often they're doing this in conjunction with supervisors and managers. Throughout that process, you need to make sure you're following these legal requirements, which is why we'll focus more on these in our employment law material. One of the main requirements is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. This prohibits employers from discriminating against even just applicants or people on the job, based on their race, religion, color, sex or gender, or national origin. This act also created what's known as the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, to investigate discrimination complaints, ensure employees will be hired and managed without discrimination, and to help set up affirmative action programs to increase job opportunities for protected groups. So this is a free resource available to you, and as an employer, it's available to your employees. So it's important to make sure as a manager, you're treating everybody in a consistent manner. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 also prohibits employers from discriminating against disabled applicants. An employer is actually required to make a reasonable accommodation for known disabilities of qualified applicants, or an employee if it would not impose what we call an undue hardship on the operation of that employer's business. So the example I like to give is someone who's a little hard, it's difficult for them to see. Making the lettering on a screen larger can be an easy way to help provide an accommodation for that applicant. It's not going to be a very expensive one to do that. Something like a headset for someone who, is having trouble with their hands and it's difficult to hold a phone all day. A headset's $10, $15, $20, and we have a fix that accommodates that person. Now, they need to still be able to perform the essential functions of the job, but the idea here is that the workers should try to provide accommodations when reasonable so that they can do just that. They should not be discriminated against simply because of this known disability. So again, we're going to talk more about employment law. If you're excited and want to learn more about some of these key areas, you can click on the link on the screen or go to our employment law learning module. We're going to talk more now about orientation, training, and evaluation. Some of you may have experienced some of these things already, so try to think through some examples of those, and I'll try to share some of mine as well. Orientations are very common when you're first hired for a job. Even at a new school, you'll have a new student orientation because everyone needs to know what's expected of them and how well they are performing. There are just some things that are specific to that career opportunity that you won't learn in the classroom. So learning about the firm, its culture, the people there, the organizational structure, how they treat employees. These are all the benefits of employees. These are all things you might see in a new hire orientation. Company policies, your workers' rights, and those can go above and beyond what the legal requirements are at a minimum. One example of a new hire orientation I had was with the U.S. Department of Education. They had hired a number of new candidates. All the new candidates that were starting that week were hired together, and we did things like get our badges ready, start our security clearances, fill out paperwork, learn about company policies, learn about our benefits so we can make the right choices, and meet some of the key players that we should be familiar with. So it was a great way to get introduced to the organization and to learn more about that specific organization. Training is something that's more ongoing in a firm. It's a good investment not just for employers, but also for employees. It's always important to be continuing to grow your resume, building new skills and learning new things so that you can be more marketable for more positions. There are many types of training. A lot of them are on the job. It might be that you're shadowing someone in a similar role to watch what they're doing and learn on a hands-on way. It could also be in a classroom. When I worked for Deloitte Consulting, they had something called Deloitte University in Texas where they actually had a whole campus. It was like a 5-star resort dedicated to training their employees, and they had lots of different classrooms to help engage us and to provide those trainings. Some training's computer-based. It can be easier to provide an online training where the same information can be delivered to people across the globe. There can also be a lot of management and leadership development opportunities. As some firms hope to grow individuals into these roles, they'll offer ways to help you learn to be a better manager or to hopefully engage in these opportunities. When I worked for AT&T, the managers all attended a leadership training at one of their headquarters, and it was a great way to learn more about some best practices and being a great leader. We learned about tools like learning about how different employees have different personality types and how to manage to each of those. We also learned how to talk in stronger, more active language. Instead of saying things like, I think I will have the best store, saying I will have the best store, or I have the best store. So some of those great skills that you can learn from other leaders, and you'll usually see those present at many firms. Evaluation is a performance appraisal, which is a good way to give feedback on how you're performing on the job. There's a few main types in the field. One of the ones I like to talk about is what's known as the compliment sandwich. You might see this in feedback from your professor, even me, or from your manager. It's a method in the business field that allows you to be effective yet polite when giving a critique. The idea here is that you praise the employee. You talk about some of the things they've done very well. Then you give that constructive feedback, and you want to do it in a way that's not attacking them. Then finally you wrap up with some more praise, thus sandwiching the criticism inside of praise. Okay, now there's some controversy around whether or not this works, but you'll notice it's in practice by a lot of people. And I like to do this. Telling them, hey, you're doing a really good job with our customers. You're giving them a lot of great information. One thing you could do is try to speed up the process, by bringing them over to the register when having that conversation. But ultimately, the ability to communicate well with our customers and to help make sure they have a positive experience is so important, and I appreciate that you're able to do that. Okay, that way they're getting some good feedback along with the bad. And the big part of that I want to emphasize is giving that positive feedback. To your employees, if you're always telling them, hey, you did this wrong, it's going to feel bad. So it's important not just to do this in one setting, but in general, to give that positive feedback. Hey, you did a great job with that customer. That was an awesome sale. You're doing really well coming on time every day. That way, when there is a situation where you do need to be more constructive, they're not feeling like you're just focusing on what they're doing wrong and feeling attacked. It also gives your employees the opportunity to know that they should reinforce what they're doing and continue doing it by giving them that positive feedback too. That's something I think most managers really struggle with. They're kind of reactive and they're focusing on when problems happen, telling them, hey, this was a problem, you need to fix it, rather than giving them that attention when they're doing things well. So it's good to be mindful of that. A quick comment, a quick email saying, hey, that was a really great report that you wrote up can make a big difference. Now, one really great evaluation tool is what we call the 360-degree evaluation. And this is another practice being used by firms. It allows you to evaluate someone on multiple levels from external sources as well as internal. So first of all, there'll usually be a self-evaluation. You evaluate how you think you're performing. Usually then your supervisor will. Anyone that you're working with, they call them subordinates, that any employees or customers you might be working with. Coworkers, your peers, and anyone else that can give some objective feedback on you. By having these various groups provide feedback, it allows the opportunity to remove some bias. That way, if I'm getting evaluated by just one person who maybe doesn't like me, it's going to be more bias. Here, by having multiple levels, multiple people evaluating me, hopefully the feedback will be more accurate and on more of the different levels of the things I do, how I help my team. So an example of this at Montgomery College, when I'm evaluated, they look at my students. Okay, these would be like the customers on the jobs. They look at how my students evaluate me in the rankings they provide each semester and the comments that they provide. I provide a self-assessment as well, how I feel I'm doing on the job. Then I have a couple coworkers observe my classes and provide some feedback on how they feel I'm performing. My manager will also, the chair of the department, will also provide feedback, as well as the dean, the highest level in our department. Okay, ultimately, that provides a really good overview. However, it's time consuming. So while this can be very beneficial and many firms do use it, because it's so time consuming, getting so many groups involved providing this feedback and then analyzing that feedback, it's not always the best method. Another commonly used method is what's known as management by objectives. Here, an employee will be evaluated on how well they accomplished a specific set of objectives determined to be critical in completing their job successfully. And usually you'll agree to these ahead of time with your boss. So for example, at the US Department of Education, I had to set out 5 goals. And it might be that I focus on one task in that goal 40% of the time and something like training 20% of the time. But kind of the key roles that I had in my job were spelled out with very relevant and specific objectives. SMART goals, the tool we learned earlier, goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound, can be very helpful in this regard. And then the idea here is to make sure you're obtaining that goal. So at the U.S. Department of Education, we'd have regular meetings to see how we were tracking towards each of those objectives. I want you to think about some of the benefits and issues with some of the performance appraisals we've talked about today, as in others you might find in your research. Decide which evaluation technique you'd prefer if you had to give feedback on the job. In this little cartoon here, it says, your supervisor says you have been giving 100% each week, but at the rate of 20% each day. You have to think about how you're giving them the information, how you're communicating that to make sure it's meaningful, and hopefully that you're not really upsetting some of your employees. I think the biggest part of feedback to be mindful of is just being more regular in the feedback you're giving. Okay, giving it more often, giving both positive feedback along with that constructive feedback when necessary, and making suggestions. And one of the things I hate is when that person says, man, you are just terrible with customers, and they don't give any opportunities to fix that. Okay, pair them up with someone who's doing a good job. Or, tell them specifically, here's something you can do differently. If you're just telling them what they're doing wrong and you're not giving them ways to resolve it, it's really not constructive. Okay, so for example, one of the methods that AT&T used with its management was to pair the best manager, the one who had some of the best scores, on things like the sales and customer feedback, with the worst performing stores manager. By pairing them together, they were able to share best practices, work together to help improve the organization as a whole. We're going to talk now about compensation, which is the amount employees are paid in money and benefits. Be mindful of that benefit piece. If your organization is putting money towards retirement, you should be putting about 10% of your salary towards retirement. So if they're automatically putting 5% in for you, or they'll match up to that much, that's a bigger part of your overall pay than just the salary. Things like how much they're paying in your health insurance. You need health insurance. So if they're paying a large portion, which makes it so you don't have to pay as much, that's another great benefit. So you really want to be mindful of how those benefits factor into your overall pay. Now there's 2 types of actual pay. One is what's known as a wage, which is an hourly rate based on the amount of work accomplished. Now, you can also just be paid on the amount of work accomplished. If you get 50 reports in, you get $50 kind of a thing. But generally, you'll find in a lot of entry-level jobs that you'll receive hourly pay in a wage. A salary is pay calculated on a periodic basis. So you might have a weekly or monthly salary, and this is something that's going to stay the same no matter how many hours you're working. So it was interesting. When I worked at AT&T, I was an hourly wage worker as a sales representative and as an assistant manager. Because of that, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, we'll learn more about in employment law, I had to be paid a minimum wage, and if I worked overtime, I got paid time and a half. So I actually was making great money working 50, 60 hours a week because of this overtime pay. I was promoted very quickly into a manager role, which was a salary position where I was paid a monthly salary, no matter how many hours I was putting in. So suddenly I was working 50, 60 hours, I was in a higher ranked position, and I was actually making less money than I did as an assistant manager, so I lost all that overtime pay. So it's important to understand how you're getting paid and how that factors in to your job opportunity. So talking more now about employment earnings. I really encourage you to try to gauge what the salary might be in a field of interest for you by using resources like www.salary.com or www.glassdoor.com. These help give you some insight on the job you might be in and what the potential pay would be. So especially if they ask you how much do you want to get paid in an interview, you kind of know the range and know what to expect. Now, this is big. I know a lot of business owners that will ask that question in the interview because what they find is often you'll ask to be paid less than they're able to give you. So let's say you ask for $15 an hour, they can offer you 16, you'll be excited, and really they could have paid you 18. But because you asked and you asked for less, they're able to exceed what you want and really be able to pay a little less in the meantime. So it is a big deal to be familiar with what the salary might be. Same thing if that job requires a lot of different education, and you're going to spend a lot of money obtaining that education, and then the earning potential is very low, it might be an area that could be difficult for you. So for example, it can cost a lot of money to become a licensed therapist, and then the salaries for that position are pretty low. So before deciding how much money to spend on going to school and get the proper education to do that, you want to make a good decision about whether or not you can spend that much and really make it back and have the right earning potential. So I'm going to zoom in now on the screen to this chart, which shows the earnings and the unemployment rates by educational attainment. And a lot of times I'm getting this question and people are concerned about, is the degree worth it? And I always like to make the point, it's not going to hurt anything unless you're spending too much money obtaining it. So this is data for persons age 25 and older based on their earnings for full-time wages and salary workers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a great credible source. You'll see here the average weekly earnings for the varying degrees. So you can see certainly that your earnings in general will be higher based on the higher education level you obtain. Even just an associate's degree, but a bachelor's degree versus, no college is a much higher pay level and hopefully more opportunities available to you. Okay, you'll also notice that in terms of opportunities, without even a high school diploma, you're going to have a very high unemployment rate. It's going to be hard for you to find work. Whereas as you continue your education, you'll see it'll be easier for you to get job opportunities with the further education. So one of the interesting things you might like to see is this really cool initiative this company took to pay all of their workers $70,000 a year. Dan Price decided, with Gravity Payments, decided that he really felt 70 grand a year was the right number to live comfortably. So if you're interested in this, there's an update here on it. I'm going to show you a quick video and you can click on either of these links, but I'll show you the quick video to learn more.
Stitch Fix is an online personal you don't love. You just send it back for free. Sign up.
Supporters of equal pay for men and women have declared today Equal Pay Day to highlight the wage gap between the sexes. They say that a woman needed to work all of last year, right through this, the 104th day of 2015, to earn what a man made in 2014 alone. Well, everyone is getting a raise at a Seattle-based company. Anthony Mason now with a story you'd probably like your boss to see.
Dan Price made the announcement of the pay raise at his company's quarterly meeting.
And we're going to have a minimum $70,000 pay rate for everyone that works here.
As the CEO explained that minimum salaries at Gravity Payments, a Seattle-based credit card processing company, would jump to $50,000 immediately and to $70,000 within 3 years. His 120 employees sat in stunned silence before bursting into applause and giving their boss a standing ovation.
I think it's life-changing for everybody in various ways.
For Jose Garcia, a 29-year-old equipment supervisor with $54,000 in student debt, his $33,000 salary jumps to $50,000 immediately.
Maybe I cried when I called my mom.
Price says he was inspired by a Princeton study that showed that emotional well-being rises as incomes rise up to $75,000.
So I realized that people that are making less than that, there's an emotional cost that they have every single day. And you only get to live once.
Entrepreneur Magazine's Entrepreneur of the Year in 2014, Price says the move will cut his company's profits almost in half for now. To cushion the blow, he slashed his own $1 million paycheck to $70,000.
I want to be a part of the solution to inequality in this country. And so if corporate America also wants to be a part of that solution, that would make me real.
So that was a great example of how we see companies kind of changing things up to try to help make sure that their employees are paid equally, but also paid well. If you want to learn more about the wage gap that was referenced in that video, you'll see a couple resources. The Daily Show had about a 5-minute clip on it. You can YouTube The Daily Show, the future of gender wage equality. And also there's a College Humor video, which is about a minute long, just kind of illustrating this issue, which is called One Woman Discovers the Wage Gap. You can also YouTube and access. One other piece that you might be interested in is what's known as the Giving Pledge, which is an effort to, like Dan Price did, invite the wealthiest individuals and families in America to commit to giving the majority of their wealth to philanthropy when they pass. So you can take a look at thegivingpledge.org. You'll see billionaires on there, like Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, offering to donate their earnings when they do pass to philanthropic causes. So it's a really interesting area. There's a 60-minute clip on it if you want to take a look at CBS News, and then you can go to thegivingpledge.org as well. Now, employee separation is a really broad term, and it covers the loss of an employee for any reason. So this could be voluntary, you're choosing to leave the organization, or involuntary. Okay, one is being terminated or being fired, as you may know, and that's usually based on performance. Okay, other people we say are laid off, meaning that it's not based on performance, but the company just can't afford to have maybe 10 employees, and they need to downsize to 5 employees. So they have to choose, it might be the person who was hired last is the one who's going to go out first. So that's this whole idea of employee separation. When you hear someone saying the employee turnover rate, it's the amount of people leaving the organization, whether they choose to or the company does. So for example, when I worked for federal government, their turnover rate was about 10%. For every 100 people, 10 would leave each year, either by being fired, laid off was less likely there, or voluntarily choosing to leave. Other companies like Deloitte Consulting, for example, when I was there, was around like 47%, meaning almost half the staff would leave each year, either voluntarily or be let go. So there was a much higher turnover rate. It can be more costly to have employees in and out of your company so much depending on your business model. So companies like SAS we looked at earlier this semester, they have about a 2% turnover rate. For every 100 employees, only 2% are either terminated or choose to leave. So that's a very, very small number. They're able to maintain a lot of expertise and general experience as a result and recruit some of the best people. And by not having to do so much recruiting and interviewing, they're saving time and money. So there's an activity here that you can go to cbsnews.com to learn about the cost of employees. When I worked for AT&T as an entry-level retail sales consultant during college, during our orientation, I remember them telling me it cost them $82,000 on average to recruit, hire, and train me on that job. So if I leave right away, they're losing a lot of money in that recruiting process. So you want to think about with your employees, sometimes it's worth paying them a little more or providing that extra benefit to keep that turnover rate down. This activity helps to illustrate that. Now, our last topic today is a really important one, which is about motivation. You'll learn about these classic motivational theories in your classes, and this is something that's been studied, and it's something you want to think about how you'll use in the workplace. So the main one that is talked about in many business courses is what's known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is based on a few assumptions. First of all, that people's needs depend on what they already possess, that a satisfied need's not a motivator, only needs that remain unsatisfied, and needs are arranged in this hierarchy of importance. Once you satisfy one need, even if partially, a more, what they say, a higher need emerges and demands satisfaction. So that's displayed on this pyramid. You'll see at a very basic level, we need to make sure people are fed, that they have water, that they've slept. And if you're losing sleep, you're not going to be excited about, how esteem can impact you on the job. The idea here is to build this foundation first, as you meet these needs, you'll be motivated by these unmet needs as we move up the pyramid. You expect to have employment, resources, and some type of safety in the workplace. Then it leads up to this idea of teamwork, having some belonging being important once we're fed and once we have this safety and security, ultimately leading up to this self-actualization. Growth and development can be what's important, challenges and the ability to problem solve. The lack of that can be a motivator when this base of the pyramid is met. Now, Herzberg took this theory and kind of revised it a little. This amplifies the fact that the absence of a condition doesn't cause employees to feel bad, although that factor could motivate an employee. So there's two different factors. There's hygiene factors and motivating factors. Herzberg basically says that base of the pyramid we saw introduced by Maslow is not a motivator. Okay, they result in satisfaction, but they won't necessarily improve performance. For example, I expect to be safe on the job. I expect to get a paycheck. Okay, so those types of expectations are not going to be motivators, but if they're missing, if I don't get my paycheck or it's an unsafe work environment, now that can hurt performance. So that bottom level of the pyramid, they're saying those needs need to be met to satisfy an employee, but to motivate them, we need to focus on those higher level parts of the pyramid. Recognition, job advancement, growth opportunities, those are the ones that will motivate employees. Now, another major theory to be familiar with is what's known as Vroom's expectancy theory. And this describes the process people use to evaluate the likelihood that their efforts will yield the results they want, along with the degree to which they want those results. So this is really a theory based on three factors. First, they're looking at your personal prediction, that if you put the effort in, it will lead to a desired result, a can-do approach. Then the value of that outcome to you personally, that reward, does it matter to you? And finally, the assessment of how likely a successful performance will lead to a desirable reward. So first of all, can you do it? You have an exam coming up, you want to get an A. If you study as much as possible, do you have the time, do you have the textbook, do you have the ability to do what you need to get that A? Then does that A really matter to you? The value of the reward. I like to give the example, you tell all your employees, hey, I'm going to give you a Barbie doll if you obtain the top sales goals today. Well, those employees might not be interested in the Barbie doll. Okay, you might not care about the A, you might just want to pass the class. So you need to make sure the reward matters to that employee. One great best practice I've seen in the field is just offering options. You can take a day off, you can take the equivalent in salary, either up front or over a period of 30 days, and offering those three options makes sure the reward is valuable to that specific person. Then we're going to look at how likely that successful performance will be to lead to that desirable reward. Even if I study all night, is the teacher only giving out 5 A's? So there's a 50-person class and I'd have to be one of those 5, my chances are pretty low. This is like that lottery ticket. If I try, will I actually be able to get this reward? Another theory that I really relate to is what's known as the equity theory. This is concerned with your perception of being fair and equitable treatment in the workplace. So this says that employees first consider their effort, then their rewards. Then they're going to compare those results against their coworkers. If you feel you're under-rewarded, your effort in comparison with others doing similar work, your effort could decrease. If you feel like you're over-rewarded, you might feel guilty and put more effort into the job to reduce guilt. So let me give you an example of this. Imagine your dream job, and I offer you $500,000 a year for that job. Are you happy? Probably. That's a pretty high salary coming out of college. So you're excited, 500 grand. You start work, and suddenly there's a person next to you doing the same job, but they're barely showing up. And when they submit work, it's low quality, and they are really half the performer you are. And you find out they're getting paid $700,000. Are you still happy with your $500,000 salary? That's where the equity theory comes in. Are you being treated fairly? You might have been happy with $500,000 in a salary before, but if you're getting paid less than the person next to you and they're not working as hard as you, it can certainly be a demotivator. Our last theory we'll talk about in this class is what's known as the goal setting theory. Here it says people will be motivated to the extent to which they make these sort of SMART goals, specific, challenging goals, and that they receive feedback on their progress toward that goal achievement. The higher the goal, the more effort they'll put in to achieve it. So again, just by setting goals, by using management by objectives, you can motivate an employee to perform. To finish our conversation today, I'd like to introduce you to a little bit of a pep talk as one example of a motivational practice.
The world needs to stop being boring. Yeah, boring is easy. Everybody can be boring, but you're good at that. Life is not a game, people. Life isn't a cereal either. Well, it is a cereal. And if life is a game, are we on the same team? I mean, really, right? I'm on your team, you're my team. This is life, people. You got air coming through your nose. You got heartbeat. That means it's time to do something. A poem. Two roads diverged in the woods, and I took the road less traveled. It hurt, man! Really bad. Rocks, thorns, and glass. My parts broke. Wah! Not cool, Robert Frost. But roads that really were too fast. I want to be the one that leads to awesome. It's like that dude Jordan said. Don't stop believing. Unless your dream is secret. Then you should get a better dream. I think that's how it goes. Get a better dream and keep going. Keep going, and keep going. Will Michael Jordan have quit? Well, he did quit. No, he retired. Yeah, that's what he retired. But before that, in high school, what if he quit when he didn't make the team? He would have never made Space Jam. And I love Space Jam. What will be your Space Jam? What will you create will make the world awesome? Nothing if you keep sitting there. That's why I'm talking to you today. This is your time. This is my time. It's our time. We can make every day better for each other. If we're all on the same team, let's start acting like it. We got work to do. We can proud of it. Oh, we can dance about it. We were made to be awesome. Let's get out there. I don't know everything. I'm just a kid. I do know this. Supervised youth to give the world a reason to dance. So get to it. You just been pep talk. Create something that will make the world awesome.
So you can actually use a motivational speech from yourself or use a YouTube video like the one I just showed you to help inspire and motivate your employees as well. Many businesses use a great story about how they impacted a customer or a client as a way to motivate and really drive home some of the values for the organization. You can also look to some of these famous talks we've seen throughout time, and you'll see an example of those with Randy Mausch in the learning module. So I hope you take a look and find something that motivates you. And hopefully you enjoyed our discussion today on the people side of business, human resource management.